Now, China's president is ignoring Mr. Trump's tweets, but is flexing some military muscle of his own. Xi Jinping presided over a huge military parade Sunday at a base in Inner Mongolia. 600 types of weaponry were rolled out. The event, marking the 90th anniversary of the People's Liberation Army, has been long anticipated, but only recently announced. China says the timing has nothing to do with the current situation in the region. Just a coincidence. All right, let's talk more about this with Bruce Klingner. He once helped run the CIA's Korea division, and he is now a senior research fellow at the Northeast Asia Heritage Foundation. He is joining us now from CNN Washington. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
So we know that Korea watchers have been warning about this for some time now, that North Korea was going to get to this threshold, a second ICBM test. And experts are now saying that this particular missile could, get hit as far as Denver and Chicago. So now what?
Well, it certainly can hit the continental U.S., and it's certainly not a surprise. When I was at CIA in the late 1990s, we worked on an unclassified national intelligence estimate predicting North Korea would have the ability to hit the continental U.S. with a nuclear warhead by 2015. So we may have been off a few years, but clearly this is a threat that's a long time coming. The Trump administration complains that China's not doing enough, which is correct, but also the Trump administration continues to hold back on fully implementing U.S. law and U.S. targeted financial measures. If the administration were to impose secondary sanctions, it could influence Chinese banks and businesses away from engaging North Korea, and that doesn't require the permission of the Chinese government.
Yeah, and when you talk about President Trump complaining, I want to show that tweet that was sent out after this ICBM test, and President Trump saying this in a series of tweets. I am very disappointed in China. They do nothing for us with North Korea, just talk. We will no longer allow this to continue. China could easily solve this problem. And what you're saying, Bruce, is that that the United States should impose secondary sanctions, which would basically force the hand of China to stop doing business with North Korea. I also, by the way, want to bring up with what Henry Kissinger, a former Secretary of State who actually opened diplomatic relations with China, what he had to say. This is according to the New York Times. Mr. Kissinger apparently called Secretary of State Rex Tillerson with this approach. He says, quote, I believe we have a better chance of getting to the nuclear problem with North Korea if we first come to an agreement with China about what follows after the collapse of the North Korean regime. And what Mr. Kissinger was saying there was that, the U.S. would have to commit to withdraw its troops from the border if there were a collapse of the North Korean regime. Do you believe that's a viable strategy?
I think it's an extremely poor idea. One should not signal weakness of basically abrogating the U.S.-South Korean military alliance, withdrawing our troops from the area, and presumably, ending the nuclear guarantee, the extended deterrence guarantee. You don't go into negotiations with China about that. Also, South Korea, our key ally, would criticize us for, they've criticized us in the past for negotiating their security over their heads. South Korea would need to be the one making the decisions as to what happens on the Korean Peninsula after the collapse of the North Korea. Clearly, we'd have a peace treaty negotiations, which might involve China and the United States. But the South Korean people and the Korean people are the ones that have to determine their future. So China has shown that it's reluctant to talk about what its red lines are, what its intent are for a collapsed North Korean regime. So the George Bush administration, the Barack Obama administration, both tried to engage with China on an official and an unofficial level, trying to get a sense of what they were thinking of in a post-North Korean situation. And the Chinese government, even Chinese academics, would refuse to engage on that.
Do you think China is more concerned about a nuclear-armed North Korea or the THAAD anti-defense system that the U.S. has deployed to South Korea?
Well, they have focused their anger and their economic warfare against South Korea for a defensive response to its ally North Korea's continuing building up of its offensive nuclear weapons against the South. So, if China were to engage in half the action against North Korea as they've done against South Korea, we'd be much further along in enforcing required UN sanctions. So it's China knows that the THAAD missile defense system cannot constrain Chinese strategic or intermediate range missiles. The U.S. and South Korea have tried to provide technical briefings, and Beijing has repeatedly refused that. So their claims against that are false, and they're disingenuous. They know they're false.
Yeah, very good point there. Bruce Klingner, great to have you on. Thank you.
Thank you.